Welcome to TalkTensors. Today you are joining us for a deep dive into an absolute watershed paper in AI safety and alignment research.
Yeah, it really is a watershed moment.
It is. And if you're prepping for a meeting or catching up on the field, or honestly, if you are just insanely curious about the mechanics of machine learning, you're in the right place. Our mission today is to thoroughly unpack this seminal framework designed to safely identify machine-generated text without, and this is the key part, without degrading the quality of the language model itself.
Which is, the holy grail of this kind of research.
Exactly. We are going to explore the exact mechanisms of watermarking large language models. But before we get into the methodology or the empirical results of the fascinating vulnerability landscape we're going to cover, we really need to talk about the stakes. We have to understand the why before the how. Because we're living in this moment where the capabilities of large language models are just scaling at a breathtaking pace. We're talking about highly aligned, incredibly powerful systems that can write persuasive essays, generate executable code, hold human-like conversations. But with all that capability comes a really, really serious threat model.
The landscape has fundamentally shifted. I mean, when we talk about the threat model today, we have to look way beyond that classic trope of a student using a chatbot to write a high school history paper.
Yeah, that's small potatoes now.
Exactly. The concerns driving this specific research are infrastructural. We're looking at the potential for mass automated social engineering. We're looking at disinformation campaigns deploying synthetic bots across social media platforms at a scale, and crucially, with a level of fluency that we have just never had to defend against before.
It's the wholesale creation of synthetic information ecosystems.
Right. But for machine learning researchers, the people actually building these models, there's an even more existential threat looming on the horizon, and that is the concept of model collapse.
Model collapse. I've seen this term floating around a lot recently in alignment circles. What exactly is happening when a model, quote unquote, collapses?
Well, think about how we build these massive language models in the first place. The internet is the primary data set for training future generations of AI. We scrape billions of pages of text to teach the model how to predict the next word.
Right.
But what happens if the internet becomes flooded with synthetic, unmarked outputs from current models? Future models are inevitably and inadvertently going to ingest that synthetic data during their training phase.
Oh, I see.
And because synthetic data is often statistically narrower, it lacks the chaotic, long-tail variance of natural human language training on it. It's like taking a photocopy of a photocopy.
It loses resolution every time.
Exactly. Over successive generations, the model's performance just degrades. It forgets the rare words, it loses its grasp on complex grammar, and eventually the outputs become this homogeneous, low-quality slurry. That is model collapse. Therefore, the ability to reliably audit, detect, and filter out machine-generated text isn't just a policing mechanism, it's a core principle of harm reduction. It's about preserving the future viability of AI research itself. If we can't distinguish human text from machine text, the whole data ecosystem just becomes toxic.
So we have this massive pressing need to tag AI-generated text just to save the future of the internet's data pool. How does the paper we're looking at today actually solve this? Because from my reading, the single most important contribution, really the thesis of this research, is something called the soft watermarking framework.
Yeah, the soft watermark.
And what makes it so fascinating to me is that it's designed for proprietary models, but it allows for detection via an open source algorithm. It invisibly biases the model's token selection toward a randomized, quote unquote, green list.
Yeah.
And it does this without requiring a third-party auditor to have access to the model's underlying parameters or its private API.
That decoupling is a huge paradigm shift. Because historically, if you wanted to know if a specific company's model generated a piece of text, you needed access to that company's internal servers to check the probabilities.
Which they are obviously never going to give you.
Right. So this paper completely severs that dependency. It builds this cryptographic bridge between the private generation of the text and the public detection of the watermark in a rigorously mathematical way.
Okay, so before we can really appreciate how this new soft watermark works, we have to look at the graveyard of failed ideas that came before it. What were researchers doing before this paper? Because it feels like the tech world has been trying to solve the "is this AI" problem for years now. Weren't there already detectors out there doing a decent job?
Well, the community historically relied really heavily on what we call post-hoc detection models. The basic idea was to fight fire with fire. You take an existing language model like a BERT or a Roberta architecture, and you fine-tune it to act exclusively as a binary classifier. You feed it a paragraph of text, and it looks for statistical anomalies. It looks at the perplexity, which is essentially how surprising the text is to an AI, and it outputs a probability score. Human or machine.
But those post-hoc detectors seem to have really fallen out of favor. Why did that approach hit a wall?
The margin of error just vanished. Post-hoc detectors rely on finding measurable, consistent biases in machine text. For early, smaller models, AI text was noticeably repetitive, or it lacked structural variance. The detector could easily spot those fingerprints.
It was obvious.
Yeah. But as language models scaled up to tens or hundreds of billions of parameters, their output became indistinguishable from human writing on a statistical level. The margin between human-written text and machine-generated text shrank to this almost imperceptible sliver. And when a detector is operating on a microscopic margin, you run into a catastrophic problem: false positives.
I can imagine. If the detector is desperate to find a pattern, it might start seeing ghosts in perfectly normal human text.
That is the core issue. The detector started flagging actual human writing as AI generated, and the burden of these false positives does not fall evenly at all. It disproportionately impacts non-native English speakers, whose writing might naturally exhibit a tighter, more formulaic vocabulary that an AI detector misinterprets as synthetic.
Oh, wow, yeah.
It also impacts neurodivergent individuals whose structural freezing might trigger those same false flags. The ethical implications of falsely accusing someone of using AI, especially in an academic setting or a professional environment, are incredibly severe. So post-hoc detection simply became too brittle and too risky to scale.
Okay, so training an AI to catch an AI became a dead end. What about the other historical approach I've seen mentioned in literature? Steganography, like hiding secret messages in the text itself.
Rule-based steganography was another major avenue of research, and it also failed, but for a very different reason. This approach involved trying to force the language model to follow rigid, hidden rules.
Like what kind of rules?
Well, early attempts literally tried to parse the syntactic tree of a generated sentence and swap out specific synonyms to encode a hidden message. Or they would take the model's entire vocabulary, split it into chunks, and force the model to only use words from certain chunks in a specific sequence to encode bits of binary data.
Let me guess. It made the AI sound completely robotic. I mean, if I'm writing a novel and someone tells me I can only use words that start with the first half of the alphabet, my writing is going to suffer immediately.
It completely destroyed text fluency. It boxed the language model into a corner, overriding the natural linguistic distributions it had spent millions of dollars of compute time learning. The text became clunky, unnatural, and basically useless for downstream tasks.
Right, which sets the stage perfectly for the author's innovation here. But to really grasp the genius of the soft watermark, the paper first walks us through a basic, naive approach to watermarking as a sort of proof of concept. They call it the hard red list. And I'd love to walk through how this works step by step, because it perfectly illustrates the fundamental physics, really the constraints of how an AI generates language.
It is the best starting point because it isolates the mechanical challenge. Let's look under the hood of a large language model, right at the moment it's about to generate a single word. The final layer of the neural network doesn't output a word directly. It outputs a massive list of raw numbers called logits. There is one logit for every single possible word or token in the model's vocabulary.
And that vocabulary might be, what, 50,000 words long?
Exactly.
So it's essentially holding a giant spreadsheet of 50,000 words and assigning a score to each one based on how well it fits the prompt.
Correct. But those raw scores, those logits, can be any number: positive, negative, massive, tiny. To make them usable, the model passes all 50,000 logits through a mathematical function called a softmax.
Right, the softmax function.
Yeah, the softmax converts those raw scores into a clean probability distribution. Suddenly you have 50,000 percentages that all add up perfectly to 100%. The model then samples from that distribution. It basically rolls a weighted 50,000-sided die to pick the next word.
Okay, I have that picture in my head. The giant weighted die roll. So how does the naive hard red list algorithm 1 in the paper intervene in this process?
We intervene right before the die is rolled. We look at the token that was just generated, the previous word in the sequence. We take that specific word and we run it through a mathematical hash function.
A hash function.
Think of a hash function as essentially a digital meat grinder. You put a piece of data in, and it spits out a unique fixed-length string of numbers. We use that string of numbers to seed a pseudo-random number generator.
And the key to a pseudo-random number generator is that it's deterministic. I mean, if I feed it the exact same seed token tomorrow, it will spit out the exact same quote-unquote random sequence of numbers.
That property is absolutely vital. Now, using that generated sequence of numbers, we take the model's entire 50,000 word vocabulary and we randomly shuffle it. Then we chop it straight down the middle. We've just created a green list containing 25,000 random words and a red list containing the other 25,000 random words.
Okay, half and half.
Right. And here is the hard rule of the algorithm. We take a red pen, cross out all the probabilities for the red list words, and force the language model to only roll the die among the green list words. We absolutely ban it from ever generating a token on the red list.
On paper, this sounds beautifully simple. And from a detection standpoint, I can see why it's so appealing. I mean, if I'm an auditor and I know the secret hash function, I can look at a suspicious tweet, I could look at the first word, run the hash, recreate the exact green and red list for that specific moment in time, and just check the second word.
Exactly.
I can do this for every single word in the tweet, just counting how many times the text violates the red list.
The detection math is incredibly powerful. Because the lists are generated randomly for every single position in the sentence, a human writer who has no access to the secret hash is just guessing blindly in the dark. A human will accidentally use a red list word about 50% of the time, just by sheer random chance.
Right.
But the watermarked AI, it will use a red list word 0% of the time. The statistical probability of a human accidentally avoiding a randomly generated red list for even just 20 consecutive words is vanishingly small.
It's like flipping a coin 20 times and getting heads every single time. You immediately know the coin is rigged. But the authors point out that this hard red list has a fatal flaw. They abandon it almost immediately in the paper. Why doesn't this work in practice?
The fatal flaw is rooted in a concept from information theory called entropy. Specifically, low entropy sequences destroy the hard red list approach.
The paper keeps bringing up this phrase, low entropy sequences, as the roadblock. What exactly is a low entropy sequence in plain English?
Think of entropy as a measure of uncertainty or creative freedom. A high entropy state means the AI has a lot of equally valid choices. If I prompt the AI with, "The artist looked at the canvas and felt a sense of," the next word could be dread, wonder, peace, nostalgia. There is a lot of uncertainty. That's high entropy.
Makes sense.
A low entropy state, however, means the outcome is highly predictable. There is virtually no uncertainty. The path forward is rigid.
Like the classic typing exercise, the quick brown fox.
Yeah.
Given those 4 words, the entropy for the next word is basically 0. We all know what comes next.
And the language model knows it too. Its internal spreadsheet has given the word jumps a 99.99% probability. Every other word in the English language shares the remaining 0.01%. It is a highly deterministic sequence. Another perfect example is writing code.
Oh yeah, code is incredibly strict.
Right. If the AI is generating a standard loop in C plus 8, and it writes for I equals 0 semicolon, I is less than n semicolon, the very next logical token is overwhelmingly predetermined to be I++. The syntax is unforgiving.
Now let's put that low entropy reality on a collision course with our hard red list algorithm. The model prints the quick brown fox. It takes the word fox, runs it through the meat grinder, gets the hash, and generates the random lists. And randomly, just by pure bad luck, the word jumps ends up on the red list.
It creates an immediate catastrophe for the text.
Because it's banned.
Yes.
Ah.
The hard rule absolutely forbids the model from outputting jumps, even though it is the only word that makes logical sense. So what happens? The model is forced to look at the green list for the next most probable word. But because the entropy was so low to begin with, all the words on the green list have microscopic fractional probabilities. They're words like teleports, scuba dives, or bureaucracy.
So the model writes, the quick brown fox bureaucracy over the lazy dog.
And suddenly, the perplexity of the text, that measure of how unnatural or surprising it is, absolutely skyrockets. The text quality is ruined. The model sounds like it is hallucinating.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, the overarching lesson here is that you simply cannot enforce hard cryptographic rules on a highly deterministic system. When there is only one correct word, the model must be allowed to use it. Otherwise, the entire illusion of intelligence breaks down.
That is the exact insight that brings us to the core breakthrough of the entire paper. The authors realize that a binary ban is just too brittle. A brick wall doesn't work. Instead of banning red list words outright, they introduce a constant, a mathematical bias, which they denote with the Greek letter delta. This is the birth of the soft watermark.
Instead of a brick wall, it's a gentle breeze. I love this. Let's walk through how this delta bias actually operates on that giant spreadsheet of 50,000 words. We still hash the previous word, right? We still randomly split the vocabulary into a green list and a red list.
We keep all of that structural scaffolding. The pivot happens at the very last microsecond before the model turns the raw scores into percentages. Under the soft watermark framework, we do not ban the red list. Instead, we take our constant delta, let's say it's a value of 2.0, and we simply add it to the raw logits of every single word on the green list. We give them a mathematical boost. Then we run the whole list through the softmax function to get our final probabilities.
Let's visualize how that actually plays out in those two different entropy states we talked about. Let's look at the low entropy scenario first, where the model is trapped and has to say a specific word. Let's say the prompt is the first name Barack.
The language model calculates the logits for the next word. Because Barack Obama is an overwhelmingly common entity in its training data, the raw logit score for the token Obama is going to be a massive, towering spike. Let's say it has a raw score of 50, while every other word in the vocabulary has a raw score hovering around 5. It is incredibly confident.
Right.
Now, we generate our random list based on the word Barack. Let's say, unfortunately, Obama lands on the red list.
Oh no, our only good word is on the red list again.
But watch what happens with the soft watermark. We take our delta bias, let's use that value of 2.0, and we add it to all the irrelevant words on the green list. Their scores go from 5 to 7. The score for Obama stays at 50.
So it's 50 versus 7.
Exactly. When we run those numbers through the softmax function, that massive spike of 50 completely dominates the math. Even with the delta boost, the green list words don't stand a chance. Obama remains the overwhelmingly most probable next word. The model rolls the die, and Obama wins effortlessly.
The watermark gracefully steps back. It essentially says, I see you have a very specific word you need to use here. You have a towering mountain of probability. My little delta breeze isn't going to move that mountain. Go ahead and use the red list word. It preserves the fluency and the sanity of the text completely.
It avoids the catastrophic gibberish of the hard ban. But now, let's look at the high entropy state, the creative writing prompt. She looked out the window and felt the sense of. The model calculates the raw logits. In this case, there is no towering mountain. There might be 50 different words: dread, wonder, nostalgia, peace, calm, that all have roughly the same raw score, say around 10. The distribution is a flat plateau.
And this is where the delta breeze becomes a hurricane.
Exactly. We add our delta constant of 2.0 to the green list words on that plateau. Their scores jump to 12. The red list words stay at 10. Because the initial scores were all so close to each other, adding that constant heavily tilts the scales.
Right, because 12 is significantly bigger than 10 when you run it through the softmax.
Yes. When we run those tight numbers through the softmax function, the probability mass shifts dramatically. The green list words suddenly consume the vast majority of the probability space. The model rolls the die, and it is now highly likely to sample a word from the green list.
It's an invisible nudge. Whenever the AI is daydreaming, whenever it has creative freedom, the watermark gently pushes its hand toward the green list. But whenever the AI is reciting facts or writing rigid code, the watermark fades into the background.
That's the beauty of it.
To formalize this relationship between the shape of the probabilities and how well the watermark takes hold, the authors introduce a fascinating mathematical concept in the paper. Definition 4.1. They call it spike entropy.
It is an elegant formulation tailored specifically for this problem. Traditional Shannon entropy measures the total overall uncertainty in a system. But spike entropy is a more nuanced, softened measure. It specifically quantifies how much of the probability mass is concentrated in a single spike versus distributed among many viable options. It asks the question, how flat is the plateau?
How spiky is the mountain range of probabilities? I love that visual. Why does spike entropy matter so much to the mechanics of this paper?
Because the authors mathematically prove that the expected number of green list tokens the model will ultimately generate is directly bound by the average spike entropy of the sequence. If the spike entropy is high, meaning flat plateaus and lots of creative freedom that delta bias dominates, the watermark is heavily applied and the text becomes packed with green list tokens.
And if it's low?
If the spike entropy is low, meaning towering mountains of certainty, the delta bias is ignored, the watermark fades, and the green list token count drops closer to what a normal human would naturally produce. The strength of the watermark scales dynamically with the linguistic freedom of the text.
That is brilliant engineering. And before we move on to the detective work of how we actually catch this invisible signal, we need to emphasize one crucial operational reality for anyone listening who works in deployment. This entire process we just described, the hashing, the lists, the delta bias, it all happens at the very end of the pipeline, at the sampling stage. You do not need to retrain the language model to implement this.
The economic and practical implications of that cannot be overstated. We are talking about frontier models with hundreds of billions of parameters. They are trained on clusters of thousands of specialized GPUs for months at a time. The electricity cost alone is in the millions of dollars.
It's astronomical.
If a safety alignment technique requires retraining the model from scratch or fundamentally altering its internal neural architecture, it is dead on arrival for immediate deployment. No company is going to throw away a $50 million training run.
Right.
The soft watermark is a lightweight software wrapper. It sits on top of any existing next token prediction model. It is completely model agnostic. You could implement it on a 5-year-old model or a model released tomorrow with just a few lines of code at the inference API.
So we have built a mathematically sound, completely invisible watermark that doesn't ruin the AI's writing, and it costs basically nothing to install. But building the lock is only half the battle. How do we build the key? How do we actually catch this signal in the wild? What's fascinating here is the open source advantage. How does a third party, say, the trust and safety team at a major social media platform trying to hunt down a botnet, detect this watermark without knocking on the AI company's door?
They don't need the model weights. They don't need access to the private generative API. To run the detection algorithm, the auditor only needs 2 public pieces of information: the hash function used to seed the random number generator, and the size of the green list, which the authors denote with the Greek letter gamma.
Gamma.
Gamma is simply the fraction of the vocabulary that gets assigned to the green list. Typically, gamma is set to 0.5, meaning it's a 50-50 split between green and red. But as we'll discuss later, manipulating that gamma value has profound effects.
So the trust and safety auditor receives a block of suspicious text. Maybe it's a massive political manifesto posted on a forum. They run the hash function on the first word, recreate the green list, and check if the second word is on it. They iterate through the entire document, recreating the exact lists the model would have used at that exact microsecond in the past. Then, they simply tally up the actual number of green list tokens present in the text.
And this brings us to the core statistical test. The entire detection framework is built around disproving a baseline assumption. It's built around disproving the null hypothesis.
The null hypothesis. Let's break this down without getting bogged down in the textbook formulas. If I'm the auditor, my null hypothesis is simply, this manifesto was written by a normal human being who has absolutely zero knowledge of our secret, constantly shifting green lists.
Exactly. And if that hypothesis is true, then that human writer is selecting words based purely on natural language grammar, their own thoughts, and maybe a thesaurus. They are completely blind to the cryptographic lists. Therefore, they will inadvertently stumble onto the green list at a rate exactly equal to our gamma parameter. If gamma is 0.5, a blindfolded human will hit a green list word 50% of the time just by sheer random chance.
Think of it like flipping a coin. If I flip a coin 100 times, the null hypothesis says I should get roughly 50 heads. Now, if I tally up the green words in that suspicious manifesto and I compare it to that 50% baseline, I get a z-score. The paper uses the z-statistic heavily. For our listeners, what is the intuitive way to understand a z-score?
The z-score is the mathematical way of shouting, hey, this coin is rigged. It measures exactly how many standard deviations our observed text is away from the expected human baseline. If you flip a coin 100 times and get 55 heads, your z-score is low. It's well within the realm of normal variance. You might just have had a lucky streak.
Makes sense.
But if you flip a coin 100 times and get 90 heads, your z-score skyrockets. The probability of that happening by chance is so astronomical that you can confidently declare the coin is weighted.
And the statistics the authors achieve with this method are just staggering. They state that with a standard setup, analyzing just 25 words of high-entropy synthetic text can generate a z-score of 7.4.
To put a z-score of 7.4 into perspective, it is statistically definitive. The authors state that if you set your detection threshold to a much lower z-score of 4, the probability of a false positive, meaning a human accidentally wrote a text so weirdly aligned with the secret list that it scored a 4, is just 3 times 10 to the negative 5.
That is roughly 3 in 100,000.
Yes, it is incredibly secure. A score 7.4 is like finding a winning lottery ticket on the moon.
But wait, as I was reading this section, I noticed a brilliant edge case that the authors had to solve. It goes back to our low-entropy Barack Obama example. We established that the word Barack almost deterministically leads to Obama. The soft watermark doesn't interfere with this. It lets the mountain stand. But what happens to the poor detector?
This is a critical vulnerability that would destroy the system if left unaddressed. Remember, our hashing function relies purely on the previous token. So the word Barack will always, 100% of the time, generate the exact same pseudo-random green list for the next word. Let's say purely by chance, when the system was initialized, the word Obama happened to land on the green list generated by the hash of Barack.
Okay, so the hash of Barack makes Obama green. That means every single time the model writes Barack Obama, it scores a point for the green team.
Yes. But here's the problem. A human writer will also trigger that exact same rule. If a human historian is writing a sprawling biography of the 44th president, they might naturally write the exact phrase Barack Obama 200 times in the manuscript. Every single time they write it, they unknowingly accumulate a green token.
Oh, wow, yeah.
In a worst-case scenario, this highly repetitive human text could artificially inflate the overall green token count. The math would see all those hits, push the z-score past the threshold of 4, and ring the alarm. We would be falsely accusing a historian of using AI simply because they repeatedly used a common low-entropy phrase that happened to get lucky on the cryptographic roulette wheel.
That brings us right back to the false positive nightmare of the post-hoc detectors. So how do we fix it? How do we protect the innocent human who just likes repeating themselves?
The fix is wonderfully elegant, and it happens entirely on the detection side. To prevent false positives from repetitive text, the detection algorithm simply ignores repeated n-grams. It has a memory.
How does that work in practice?
The algorithm scans the text from left to right. The first time it sees the bigogram Barack Obama, it hashes Barack, checks if Obama is green, and adds it to the statistical tally. But the second time it sees Barack Obama, it recognizes the repetition. It skips it entirely. It doesn't increment the green count. And crucially, it doesn't increment the total word count denominator. It treats the repetition as if it doesn't exist for the purposes of the mathematical test.
Oh, that is incredibly clever. And the beautiful side effect of this, which I found fascinating, is that it actually makes the detector more sensitive to actual AI text, because repeated phrases are, by definition, low entropy. They are towering mountains of probability. The soft watermark didn't use its delta nudge on them anyway. So by tossing all the low entropy repetitions out of the math, we shrink the denominator. We keep the total token count lean while preserving only the high entropy creative sequences where the soft watermark was doing its heavy lifting. It concentrates the signal by cutting out the noise.
Precisely. It's a dual-purpose engineering fix. It completely shields innocent human writers from repetitive bad luck while simultaneously sharpening the mathematical blade against the synthetic text.
All right, let's pivot. We've talked about the entropy physics, we've outlined the soft bias math, we've set up the z-score coin flip. But does it actually work in practice? The authors of this paper didn't just write theoretical equations on a chalkboard, they ran massive empirical tests.
They tested this rigorously. They utilized models from the OPT family, the Open Pre-trained Transformer models developed by Meta. Specifically, they focused on the 1.3 billion and 6.7 billion parameter versions. To simulate real-world conditions, they used the C4 dataset, targeting the real news-like subset,
which provides a massive corpus of high-quality, realistic language modeling scenarios.
Exactly. The testing protocol was straightforward. Take a random news article from the dataset, chop off the ending, feed the first half to the OPT model as a prompt, and ask it to generate the next 200 tokens. They ran this generation process over 500 times for every single parameter combination to ensure their statistical averages were ironclad.
So they were basically forcing the AI to act as an automated journalist. And what did they find regarding the trade-off? Because there is always a trade-off. If we push the delta bias too high, we risk degrading the text quality, which we measure using perplexity. We want lower perplexity, meaning more natural text. If we push the delta too low, the z-score won't be high enough to catch the bots.
They mapped this exact trade-off, the z-score, against the perplexity across various combinations of the delta bias strength and the gamma green list size. You can visualize this on a scatter plot. Now, intuition might lead you astray here. You might intuitively think that you want a large green list, say a gamma of 0.5 or even 0.8. Give the model a massive target to hit so it has plenty of good, low perplexity words to choose from.
Right. If I'm the AI and 80% of the dictionary is green, I don't have to work very hard to find a word that makes sense and satisfies the watermark.
Exactly. But empirically, the data revealed the exact opposite to be true. A smaller green list, specifically around a gamma of 0.1 restricting the green list to just 10% of the vocabulary, is actually Pareto optimal.
Pareto optimal, meaning it provides the absolute best detection power for the least amount of damage to the text quality. Why on earth does making the target smaller actually work better?
It all comes down to the math of the z-score, the rigged coin flip. Remember the baseline assumption. When gamma is small, say 0.1, a human is only expected to accidentally use a green word 10% of the time. It is a rare event. So every single time the watermarked AI successfully forces a green word using a high delta bias, it represents a massive, glaring deviation from the human baseline.
The signal pops.
Yes. You accrue statistical significance at a blinding speed. Yes, having a smaller green list means the model occasionally has to pick a slightly less optimal word, which fractionally increases the perplexity. But the z-score skyrockets so rapidly that you can achieve incredibly confident detection with far fewer tokens. You can catch the AI in 15 words instead of 50.
That is a brilliant counterintuitive insight. But here is where the empirical results get truly magical for me. It's the discovery of the synergistic effect of beam search. We need to unpack this because it elevates the whole framework.
This is arguably the most elegant technical revelation in the entire paper. Everything we've discussed so far assumes multinomial sampling. The model looks at the probabilities for the very next word, rolls the weighted die, picks a word, and moves on. It's greedy. But in high-quality text generation, especially for tasks like translation or summarization, we don't just look one word ahead, we use beam search.
Think of beam search like a chess grandmaster. A novice looks at the board and makes the best move for right now. A grandmaster looks at the board, visualizes 8 different possible moves, and then imagines the next 5 moves for each of those branches. They choose the path that results in the best overall board state 5 moves from now.
That is a perfect analogy. Beam search explores multiple branching sequences of text, simultaneously say 8 different beams, and looks several steps ahead. It calculates the cumulative probability of the entire sequence and ultimately chooses the path that yields the highest overall score.
So how does our soft delta watermark interact with the chess grandmaster?
It interacts synergistically to iron in the watermark. Remember the core mechanism. We are artificially adding our delta bias to the raw scores of the green list tokens.
Right.
Therefore, any sequence of text that happens to contain a high density of green list tokens will artificially possess a higher cumulative mathematical score.
Oh, I see where this is going.
When you unleash an 8-way beam search on this modified probability landscape, the search algorithm actively hunts through the hypothesis branches looking for those high scores. Because of delta, the beam search acts like a heat-seeking missile for green list density.
It's actively optimizing for the watermark. It's doing the hard work for us.
Precisely. It tirelessly searches the branching paths to find the perfect sequence of words that satisfies both the strict grammatical rules of English and the cryptographic demands of the watermark. The graphs in the paper are striking. When you combine the soft watermark with an 8-way beam search, you get near vertical gains in the z-score with virtually 0 cost to perplexity. The model finds the optimal path through the maze. The authors show that with a moderate bias of delta equals 2, an 8-way beam search consistently achieves an average z-score greater than 5 with as few as 35 tokens. It is breathtakingly efficient.
But what about factuality? This is a huge concern for anyone following AI safety. We all know language models have a tendency to hallucinate. Does artificially biasing the internal spreadsheet toward a randomized list of words make the model hallucinate more? If I ask the AI a trivia question and the correct factual words are on the red list, does it lie to me just to score points for the watermark?
This was a major concern, and the authors address it head-on with an empirical experiment using the Trivia QA dataset. And the results beautifully confirm the theoretical design of the soft watermark. Factual answers to specific trivia questions are, by definition, low-entropy sequences.
Right. If I prompt the model with, what is the capital of France? The internal spreadsheet isn't confused. There isn't a flat plateau of possible answers. The raw score for Paris is a towering absolute spike. The model knows the answer.
Exactly. And as we established when we walked through the low-entropy mechanics, the soft watermark mathematically steps back when faced with a towering spike. The delta breeze cannot move the mountain. So, when they ran the watermarked OPT models on the Trivia QA dataset, they found that the exact match scores, meaning the model successfully output the exact correct factual entity, dropped by less than 4 percentage points compared to the completely unwatermarked baseline model.
The soft watermark doesn't cause hallucinations because it doesn't exert its influence when the model is confident in a hard fact. It only nudges the model when the model is already creatively daydreaming in a high entropy state.
It is a self-regulating safety mechanism. It preserves the utility of the AI while ensuring audibility.
So let's take stock. We have a system that is mathematically sound based on entropy. It preserves text quality. It synergizes beautifully with beam search, and it protects factual accuracy. It sounds completely invincible. Which leads us to the most exciting part of the paper: red teaming, attacks, defenses, and security. Because in the real world, no system is invincible. The moment you deploy this on the public internet, highly motivated, malicious actors will immediately try to break it, scrub it, or exploit it.
The authors dedicate a substantial portion of the paper to exploring this vulnerability landscape, and they do a fantastic job of cataloging the attack vectors. First, we have to distinguish the deployment model. Are we talking about public watermarking or private watermarking? Everything we've discussed so far assumes a public setup where the hashing algorithm and the random seeds are open source, allowing anyone, a teacher, a platform moderator, to audit the text. But if the detection API is completely public, an attacker could mount a brute force attack.
All right, if I'm a malicious actor and I know exactly how the hash function works, I could write a script to submit thousands of minor variations of a prompt to the public detection API. I could map out exactly which words are currently on the red list, reverse engineer the cryptographic state, and just write my own bot to dodge the green list entirely.
That is the danger of a fully public system. To prevent that brute force mapping, a major AI company deploying this might opt for a private watermarking scheme. Instead of a simple open hash, they introduce a private cryptographic key, denoted as K, and use a secure pseudo-random function, something robust like AES encryption. Now, the attacker is completely blind. They have no idea what the seed is, and they cannot map the lists. The detection must happen behind closed doors on the company's servers.
But even with a private key, the authors identify a massive structural vulnerability in the math itself. It's called the amplification problem. Let's unpack this carefully. Our current setup takes the very last token generated, hashes it, and uses it to split the list for the next word. It's a window of 1. But if an attacker knows this, they just have to alter one word in the text, and it completely scrambles the hash for the next word. So intuition says, let's make the hash more robust. Let's use a wider window. Let's hash the last 5 tokens together to generate the list for the next word. Widening the window, increasing the H value to 5 seems like a logical way to add cryptographic complexity, but it inadvertently creates the amplification problem. Imagine you have a beautifully watermarked 500-word synthetic essay. The hashes are flowing perfectly. Now, an attacker maliciously deletes or alters just one single word in the middle of that essay. Because our hash window relies on the previous 5 tokens, that single corrupted word will remain inside the sliding mathematical window for the next 5 words the algorithm tries to verify. Oh, I see. The attacker flips one token, but they essentially randomize the red list for the next 5 downstream tokens. They massively degrade the overall watermark signal while exerting very little effort. A single targeted strike destroys a 5-word radius.
The damage is amplified. If an attacker only alters 10% of the document, they could theoretically scrub 50% of the watermark signal. It makes the watermark incredibly fragile to minor tampering.
So how do the authors defend against this attack amplification? They introduce a new algorithm for this, right?
They introduce Algorithm 3, Robust Private Watermarking. It is an incredibly clever engineering solution involving a self-hashing backward search. Instead of rigidly relying on a fixed sliding window of prior tokens, the model dynamically searches backward through its own previously generated text to find a suitable, stable seed token.
How does that look in practice during generation?
It adds a layer of complexity. For a given position in the sentence, the model looks at the top choices. It temporarily proposes the most likely next word. It then computes a hash using that proposed word paired with a prior token from the window. It does this matching process for all H prior tokens in the window. It runs those pairs through a minimum function to select one specific pseudo-random index pair. It uses the hash from that specific pair to generate the final green list.
Wow, that's thorough.
Yeah, if the proposed word lands on the green list, great, it is generated. If it lands on the red list, the model throws it out and repeats the backward search process with the next most likely word.
That sounds computationally exhausting. What if it has to go 10 words deep into the spreadsheet? What if the perplexity cost becomes too high and the text starts sounding weird?
The algorithm has a built-in safety valve to protect text quality. If, during this iterative backward search, the raw score of the test token falls by more than our delta constant compared to the absolute best word available, the algorithm just gives up. It accepts the best token even if it's on the red list. It prioritizes fluency over forcing the hash.
And why does this dynamic, backward-looking search neutralize the attacker's amplification?
Because the choice of which prior token acts as the seed is no longer a rigid sequence. It is dependent on pseudo-random combinations of the text itself. The authors prove mathematically that when one of the prior H tokens is changed by an attacker, the watermark at the current position only changes with a probability of 1 over H. It completely flattens the blast radius.
So the math is actually protecting itself.
In expectation, an attacker changing one token only results in one additional red list token downstream, not 5. It forces the adversary into a corner. If they want to scrub the signal, they have to do the hard work of manually rewriting a massive fraction of the document.
Speaking of rewriting a massive fraction of the document, let's dive into the attack taxonomy section of the paper. The authors meticulously catalog the specific creative ways adversaries will try to scrub the text and how the watermark holds up. Let's start with paraphrasing, specifically what they call the T5 attack.
This is a highly realistic black box attack scenario. An adversary uses a secure proprietary model, say GPT-4, to generate a high-quality watermarked essay. Then they take that essay and feed it into a weaker open-source model that they control locally. In this experiment, the authors use T5 large. The attacker systematically masks out random spans of text in the essay and asks T5 large to fill in the blanks. They are effectively using a dumb AI to paraphrase the smart AI, hoping the dumb AI will randomly replace the watermarked green words with red words.
And the authors define an attack budget for this, denoted by the Greek letter epsilon, which represents the percentage of the text the attacker replaces. So if the attacker uses the dumb AI to replace 10% of the text, does the watermark survive?
It survives effortlessly. The statistical power of the z-score is so strong that the area under the curve for the detection only drops by a fraction of a point. The text is still glaringly obvious as synthetic. To actually defeat the watermark, to drop the z-score below the threshold, the attacker has to push their budget all the way up to an epsilon of 0.3. They have to force the weaker model to rewrite 30% of the original essay.
But there is a massive trade-off for the attacker here, isn't there? I'm picturing a beautifully written essay where every third word is suddenly swapped out by an AI from 2019.
The trade-off is catastrophic for the attacker. Because they are forcing a smaller, less capable model to blindly swap words into a high-quality context, the perplexity of the attacked essay absolutely skyrockets. The paper notes that at an epsilon of 0.3, the perplexity of the text literally triples compared to the original watermark text. The language becomes clunky, disjointed, and grammatically bizarre. It sounds like a bad internet translation from 2005.
The attacker ruins their own text to hide the watermark. It's a Pyrrhic victory. If they were willing to accept text that terrible, they could have just generated the entire essay with a weaker open source model in the first place and saved themselves the trouble.
That is the ultimate success of the watermark. It forces the adversary to choose between being caught by the math or degrading their text to the point of complete uselessness.
What about more discrete attacks? The paper mentions tokenization or homoglyph attacks. I find these fascinating because they exploit the underlying, almost alien mechanics of how language models actually read text.
It's a vital vulnerability to understand. Language models do not read words the way humans do. They read tokens, which are mathematical subword chunks determined by an algorithm called byte pair encoding, or BPE. An attacker can exploit this translation layer. Let's look at a homoglyph attack. In the Unicode standard, there is a standard English letter I, and there is a visually identical Cyrillic letter I. To a human reading a screen, the word lighthouse looks exactly the same regardless of which I is used.
But to the language model's BPE tokenizer.
To the tokenizer, replacing the English I with a Cyrillic I shatters the word. Lighthouse might normally be neatly processed as two tokens, light and house. But when it hits that Cyrillic I, the tokenizer panics. It doesn't recognize the sequence. It splinters the word into 9 different fragmented character tokens. Because our cryptographic hashing function relies on the exact token IDs to seed the lists, shattering the tokens completely scrambles the downstream sequence.
Wow.
To us, an I is an I. To the model, a Cyrillic I is a completely alien barcode. The sequence is broken and the watermark evaporates.
That is insidious. So how do we defend against a homoglyph attack?
Thankfully, this one has a straightforward engineering fix. It requires text canonicalization prior to detection. Before the trust and safety auditor runs the mathematical z-score script, they must pass the suspicious text through a standard digital sanitizer. This sanitizer aggressively strips out invisible zero-width spaces and normalizes all visual homoglyphs like the Cyrillic I back to their standard ASCII English equivalents. Once the text is normalized, the proper tokenization is restored, the hash sequence realigns, and the watermark is recovered perfectly.
Okay, here is where we get to the most potent, most creative attack in the entire paper, the generative attacks, specifically the emoji attack pioneered by researcher Riley Goodside. We have to paint a picture of Figure 5 for the listener. This is brilliant, outside-the-box adversarial thinking.
It is a masterclass in exploiting the model's own capabilities against itself. Generative attacks abuse the large language model's capacity for in-context learning. They prompt the model to change its output format in a highly predictable, easily reversible way. In the emoji attack, the attacker prompts the highly capable watermarked model with something like, write a professional 500-word essay about the macroeconomic impacts of starting an ice cream shop. But you must adhere to one strict rule. You must place 2 emojis after every single word you write.
And the model, being highly aligned and compliant to formatting requests, does exactly that. It outputs something absolutely absurd, starting heart eyes, and ice cream, ice, and so on. It looks like a teenager's text message.
It looks absurd to us, but let's look at what is happening to the underlying math of the soft watermark. The algorithm hashes the previous token to generate the random list for the next token. In this emoji-laden text, every single actual English word is immediately preceded by an emoji token.
Oh, wow. The emojis are acting as cryptographic spacers.
Exactly. The watermark algorithm diligently does its job. It adds its delta bias to the green listed emojis, ensuring the emojis themselves are mathematically watermarked. But the actual English words, their green or red status is determined entirely by the hash of the preceding emoji, not the preceding English word.
And once the model finishes generating this bizarre essay, the attacker simply takes the text, writes a one-line Python script, and deletes all the emojis.
When the emojis are stripped out, the sequence is completely decoupled from the hashing logic. The English words that remain were generated based on emoji hashes, not the hashes of the words next to them. The resulting text appears completely natural, fluent, and professional to a human reader. But when the auditor runs the detection algorithm on that clean text, it looks like pure random chance. The cryptographic chain is broken, the watermark is utterly destroyed. And because the powerful frontier model generated the English words naturally in context, the perplexity is still excellent. The attacker gets high-quality AI text with zero signal.
That is an incredible structural vulnerability. How on earth does a model owner defend against an attack that uses the model's own intelligence as a weapon?
The authors note that this is a highly potent attack that cannot be solved purely with math at the sampling stage. It requires a defense at the foundational training level. The best defense is instruction fine-tuning, specifically using reinforcement learning from human feedback, or RLHF. You have to deeply train the model to recognize and refuse malicious formatting constraints. If a prompt asks for emojis after every word, or asks the model to switch every letter A with the letter E, the model must be explicitly aligned to output a hard refusal, stating it cannot comply with syntactic constraints that break natural language flow.
You essentially have to teach the AI to protect its own cryptographic signature. It highlights how watermarking isn't a standalone silver bullet you just slap on at the end. It has to be integrated into the broader safety and alignment training of the model itself.
Precisely. It is a holistic defense.
Before we move to the outro, there is one massive real-world implication of this architecture that we need to highlight. You touched on it earlier, but we need to expand on the decoupled architecture. The Z statistic used by the auditor, the rigged coin flip math, depends only on the hash function in gamma, the size of the green list. It has absolutely zero mathematical dependence on delta, the strength of the bias nudge.
This mathematical separation provides a profound engineering advantage for deployment at scale. It means a tech giant can distribute a single, universal, open-source detection script to platform moderators around the world. That script will confidently catch watermark text, while the tech giant retains the ability to dynamically, silently change the internal delta watermark strength on their servers on a user-by-user basis.
Give us a concrete example of how a company would use this dynamic delta in the real world.
Imagine a major lab deploying their flagship model. For standard, everyday creative writing prompts from normal users, where entropy is high and the watermark catches easily, they might use a moderate delta bias of 2.0. This protects the text quality while maintaining audibility. But what if a user asks the model to generate a complex Python script? Code has low entropy. Precision is critical. The company might dynamically drop the delta down to 0.5 for that specific prompt to ensure absolutely zero impact on the code's functionality, accepting a slightly weaker signal.
But the real power comes with adversarial users, right?
Absolutely. Imagine their internal monitoring system flags a suspicious API account. This account is generating thousands of hyper-partisan political tweets per minute. It looks like a coordinated botnet spinning up. The company doesn't have to ban them immediately. They can instantly crank the delta parameter up to an aggressive 10.0 for that specific user's API key.
They slap a high-visibility cryptographic die pack on the suspicious user. They force the text to be overwhelmingly green.
They enforce a massive, undeniable mathematical watermark. And the operational beauty is this. Whether the text was generated with a gentle delta of 0.5 or an aggressive die pack of 10.0, the exact same open source detection script running on a moderator's laptop will catch it. The auditor never needs to know what internal delta parameter the company used. It provides incredible, real-time operational flexibility without breaking the global verification ecosystem.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We walked through the physics of entropy, the breakthrough math of the soft bias, the coin flip detection of the z-score, the empirical trade-offs of beam search, and the incredible cat-and-mouse game of red teaming and emoji attacks. It is time to transition to my favorite part of the deep dive. It's time for our novel notion segment.
I'm ready. Where are we taking this framework?
I must state clearly for our listeners, the following segment is for entertainment purposes only. It explores highly speculative, theoretical research directions. These ideas are not contained in the source paper, but they are directly inspired by the profound safety mechanics of the author's work. So, idea 1, the viral immune system for synthetic data. I also like to call it phylogenetic watermarking.
Phylogenetic. We are taking a biological framing. I like it. Walk me through the mechanics.
We discussed at the very beginning of this deep dive that one of the core existential motivations of this paper is preventing model collapse, the inbreeding degradation that happens when future models ingest the unmarked outputs of current models. The paper solves this by allowing human auditors to run the z-score script and filter the internet data before training. But what if we can make the protection automatic? What if we encode lineage into the pseudo-random hash?
Lineage, as in structurally tracking the generational descent of the AI model.
Exactly. Right now, the soft watermark just flashes a binary signal, AI generated. But imagine if the hash function was mathematically structured so that the watermark encoded the exact generational layer. The output of GPT-4 carries a specific Gen 1 cryptographic signature embedded in the probability distribution of his green list. Now, fast forward 2 years. A future system, say GPT-5, is scraping the web. It inadvertently ingests that Gen 1 data. But during its unsupervised training run, its internal loss function, its learning algorithm, is sparely programmed to recognize those Gen 1 hash patterns. When it sees them, it heavily penalizes their replication during backpropagation.
That is a staggering concept. So instead of relying on a human researcher to painstakingly run the z-score detector over billions of web pages to clean the dataset before training, the model itself is structurally allergic to its ancestors' watermarks. The watermark acts as a synthetic immune system. It automatically downweights the mathematical gradients of its own ancestors during the learning phase. It solves model collapse not by manually filtering the data pool, but by engineering the future model to be immune to the toxic data while it learns.
Precisely. The architecture automatically rejects the phylogenetic markers of previous synthetic generations. It's an automated defense mechanism for the internet. Okay, let's look at idea 2, semantic steganography in activation space.
We are taking the watermark deeper into the neural network architecture.
Yes, much deeper. The current paper is brilliant, but as we saw with the T5 paraphrasing attack and the Cyrillic homoglyph attack, it is vulnerable because it relies on the surface-level vocabulary. It relies on the rigid tokens. If an attacker uses a weaker model to swap the tokens or shatters them with beat and knee tricks, the watermark degrades. So let's take the fight to a deeper level. What if we apply the green list and red list concept, not to the final output logics of the vocabulary, but to the geometric arrangement of concepts in the model's internal latent activation space?
For the listener, you're talking about the high-dimensional vectors, the arrays of numbers that represent the actual abstract meaning of the text long before it is decoded into English words.
Exactly. We go into the hidden layers. By softly constraining the geometric trajectory of the generation inside those hidden layers, say, gently adding a delta bias to force the semantic activations to favor certain predetermined orthogonal mathematical directions. The actual meaning of the paragraph carries the cryptographic signature, regardless of what words are eventually chosen.
The adversarial implications of that are profound. If the watermark is embedded in the semantic geometry rather than the surface text, then homoglyph attacks are entirely useless. A Cyrillic letter doesn't change the underlying meaning of the word lighthouse. Even the T5 span attack would fail. Because even if the attacker uses a weaker model to swap the word happy for joyful, the underlying geometric vector of that concept remains safely inside the green watermarked region of the latent space. Altering the tokens wouldn't change the watermarked concept. To scrub the watermark, the attacker would have to fundamentally alter the actual meaning of the text, which completely defeats the purpose of them wanting to use the AI to write their essay in the first place.
It makes the watermark practically invincible against surface-level tampering.
It would require a monumental leap in interpretability research. We would have to reliably map those alien latent spaces well enough to apply the delta biases without destroying the model's brain. But as a theoretical direction, it perfectly addresses the surface-level vulnerabilities outlined in the paper.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over as you go about your day. Let's fast forward 5 or 10 years. Imagine this soft watermarking framework, or some deeper geometric version of it, becomes the invisible, ubiquitous standard across all major language models. Every single piece of synthetic text generated on Earth is statistically flawless, highly probable, perfectly distributed across these invisible cryptographic green lists.
The internet becomes a vast sea of mathematically optimal, watermarked text. The z-scores are humming quietly in the background of everything we read.
Right. And what does that mathematical perfection mean for us? What does it mean for humans? The soft watermark relies on nudging the model during high-entropy creative moments. It thrives on optimizing mathematical probability. But human beings are not mathematically optimal. We make bizarre word choices. We use mixed metaphors. We stutter, we loop, we possess truly chaotic, unquantifiable entropy.
That is very true. When a human writer sits down at a keyboard, they are not subconsciously consulting a softmax distribution to find the most probable next token.
So here's the thought. If the detection algorithms that define authentic human writing are strictly tuned to look for text that lacks this highly structured, mathematically perfect watermark, the definition of human writing will ironically become text that is wildly inefficient, chaotic, and lacking any statistical pattern. Will we one day find ourselves in a bizarre, dystopian reverse Turing test? Will you and I be forced to write more erratically, purposely making suboptimal word choices, intentionally breaking grammatical flow and avoiding common phrases, just to prove to the content algorithms that we are still, in fact, human?
It's a haunting inversion of the original goal. We have spent decades trying to teach machines to write like intelligent humans, and we may end up having to purposefully write like flawed humans just to mathematically prove we aren't machines. It is a profound societal implication born from a brilliant piece of technical engineering.
A profound implication indeed. Thank you for joining us on this exhaustive deep dive into the physics of AI alignment, model collapse, and soft watermarking. We will see you next time on TalkTensors.